Hi guys, hi, how's it going? How you doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today we are doing the next palette review in my palette roulette series, in which I utilize a palette that is in my collection that might also be in your collection. Not necessarily the biggest, brightest, brand new thing on the market, but the name of this game is getting use out of the stuff that is already existing in our collection. And today we will be going over the Natasha Denona Retro collection. So I hope that you're in for it. I am Donna. I am a lover of all things high-end, colorful beauty and self-care. And if this is the first time you're seeing me, I do hope that you enjoy my channel. I work in the beauty industry as a district leader, and I love to bring you all the education that I am learning in the beauty industry. So we do a lot of reviews on my channel. My empties are packed full of reviews. I just love to educate you, but on the same token, I also just love to talk about makeup, and you people are my people to talk to about said thing, because ain't nobody in my personal life giving a poop about the makeup that I love to talk about with you guys. So I hope that my channel soothes your soul in a way that it inclines you to hit that subscribe button and stick around for the long haul. I would love to have you as a part of my YouTube fam here. And with that being said, let's roll into this palette review. All right, folks, so today we are going over both the Mini and the Midi Retro Palette by Natasha Denona. This one came first, believe it or not. She released first this little 5-pan Mini Retro Palette. It went over so well that she decided to make a 15-pan Midi out of the same palette. Now, with that being said, they're both inspired by, you know, romantic retro hues. When you think romantic retro hues, you think a lot of those mauves and really pretty lilacs and really pretty burgundies and maybe sage greens and a lot of like greenish mauvey tones. And that is what these two palettes bring to life in your collection if you choose to spend your money on them. One costs $25 for 5 shades and one costs $65 for 15 shades. This one has a pan size of 0.028 ounces per pan, so little tiny itty bitty pan, but they don't represent themselves in the palette in a way that makes them look minuscule. They're actually quite large pans. They're probably not super deep. And one has about twice that in each one of their pans. These Midi shadows are 0.046 ounces per pan, so just about twice what is in the minis. Now, Natasha Denona also has full size options that you can get that the pan size is actually quite larger. These are 0.08 ounces per pan in her full size options, and I have this palette out for a reason. So again, the Mini is $25, and it did come before the Midi size, which is kind of backwards of how Natasha Denona has been doing this as of late. There are 5 shades in here, but in this palette, 3 of those shades belong to other palettes as a permanent fixture in those other palettes, and we'll get there. I'll talk about that in a second. And in the Midi, there are 15 eyeshadows for $65, and none of them exist in another palette. They each are cruelty-free, and they are paraben-free, and they have a 24-month shelf life. Both of these palettes are really super pigmented. Both of them blend really super nicely. This one does have some of her cream to powder formulas in it, whereas this one does not. I think that both palettes can stand alone in anyone's collection as a one and done eyeshadow palette. If I'm honest, it's hard to say that about a 5-pan eyeshadow palette, but I firmly believe that one could stand alone in an eyeshadow collection as well. The wear time on these palettes is approximately 10 to 12 hours, and that is on a primed eye. Of course, on a primed eye, you are going to see a lot more longevity in your shadow, but I do feel like both of them perform very well, even on a dry eye. So whether you are going in without a primer, going in with a tacky base primer, going in with a dry based primer, you're going to see the same kind of functionality and the same kind of purpose and the same kind of performance out of the shadows in these palettes. I did not get the star rating on these palettes because on the Natasha Denona website, They do have a 5-star rating. There aren't a whole lot of reviews out for this palette because this one is newer to the collection. This one has a 5-star rating on Mini, a website, but I never would rate any palette in the 5-star realm just because I always feel like there is room for improvement in everything that you're doing. I think I would rank these somewhere in the 4.7, 4.8 star rating. I do think that Natasha Denona's website always has 5-star ratings on her palettes, and that is what it is. I'm not saying it's falsifying or anything like that, but I also know that you all know that I am a Natasha Denona stan. But I also hope that you all know that I would never come to you and say this palette is amazing when I don't feel like it's amazing. I really do feel like these palettes could rank in that 5-star rating category for many people out there. I would put it in the 4.7, 4.8 star rating realm if I were ranking these palettes. I think that they're beautiful palettes, and I think that together they make a glorious 20 pan, 20 shade palette. This one was inspired by this one, but also inspired to be that perfect compensatory palette to the Natasha Denona Glam palette. And I think that holding them up side by side, that's the first thing that I really noticed about them together. Let me go grab my Glam palette, just one second. I think this is the Glam palette, and it's perfectly cool tone, but also leans a little bit warm. And I'll put my palette roulette of the Glam palette up here in the cards for you so that you guys can see that, because I did mention that in my review of it. But together, I think that they're just such a pretty perfect pairing, if I'm honest, because the Glam palette does have a lot of pinky tones to it that are not really expected just by looking at the palettes. I mean, this one over here looks to, or appears kind of to be, a pinky tone, but the rest of these shadows in here actually have kind of a warmth to them that leans very heavily on this realm. And I think that they would I'm glad to have both palettes is where I'm going with this. I'm glad to have both palettes because this one actually wasn't my favorite palette to deal with. And I think the biggest reason why this one wasn't my favorite palette to deal with is because it only has 5 mattes in it. So regardless of what eye look you tried to pull together, I felt like they all very much looked the same because you had to use the same transition, the same brow bone, the same, you know, the 5 mattes in here were the 5 mattes, and that's all you really had to deal with. But this palette up here gives those 5 mattes a little bit more depth and a little bit more well-rounded color story to make them both create just such a beautiful, romantically glam look. As a matter of fact, I think when it comes down to it, like, I'm filming this a couple days before New Year's Day, and if we do anything for New Year's, if we go anywhere for New Year's, these 2 palettes would probably be the 2 palettes that I would pair together to come up with my New Year's eye look. I just think that they're perfect for each other. With that said, this Midi palette is one of those palettes that has, you know, all of Natasha Denona palettes have the holes on the back that you can poke the shadows out of and put them into their own separate little palettes to create the perfect Natasha Denona palette for you. Her full size and her midis all do that. I will probably do that with these 2 palettes and make 2 perfectly compensatory palettes that are completely different from each other as they stand alone on their own, but are perfectly paired together, because I do feel like this palette is the perfect construction to perfectly complement the Glam palette. It makes me sad though that these guys don't pop out, because I also think that these would perfectly partner in with those palettes as well. These 2 shades specifically, these 2 shades here, this kind of like greeny camouflagey matte and this like gray toned, green toned, shimmery silver would be perfect partners as well. The other 3 are a little bit more corally than I anticipated would ever look good with the big retro palette or the Midi retro palette, but they all actually partner really pretty perfect together. I have in my eye look today, I have all the shadows in this palette except for this one, and I have this one here and this this one here. So I think that they really do partner together really well. So starting with this one, I am going to swatch it and we're going to talk about each one of these shadows together. So the first one we have in here is Galaxia. Galaxia is a light pink duochrome that kind of has like a champagne-y shift to it. This one is not new to her collection. This one actually exists in the Star palette. This one is this shade right here in the Star palette. What I would say though is the one in the Star palette looks a whole lot more silver than the one in the Retro palette. And that's not just my lighting, y'all. That is actually how it looks in the palettes. So then we have Industrial, which is this one here. And that guy is kind of a green silver metallic. This one exists in the Natasha Denona Green Brown 28 pan eyeshadow palette. And it is right there. That one looks more similar to its counterpart. I think the one in the green brown does appear a little bit more dark gray than the one in the Retro palette. The next one we have is this one. This is kind of a camouflagey green gray matte. It's one of her creamy mattes. Its name is 60s and it is unique to this palette. Then we have this one here, which is called Vintage Taupe. It's an antique rose creamy matte and it is in the Tropics palette. I do not have the Natasha Denona Tropics palette, but that one is a very coral and peachy and pink in nature with a couple pops of blue, I do believe. So that one is in the Tropics palette. So there's 3 shades in this 5-pan palette that exist in other palettes in her collection. And then the last one in this 5-pan palette is this one here, and it is called Pixie. It is a pale pink champagne metallic. It does perform very, very pretty in an eye, but leans very much on the champagne side than it does on the pink side. It is in my eye look today, and on the center of that eye look, I have topped this shadow here to kind of give it that little bit of pop on the immediate center of the eye look. Then I have this one here in the crease, and I have this one here buffed out towards the brow bone. So almost every shade in this palette is what's on my eye look today. I can't say that I'm not disappointed that these shadows are in another Natasha Denona palette that is in my collection. So of the 5 shades that I paid $25 for, I already owned 2 of these shadows. That's not necessarily not disappointing, but at the same time, I do have 3 shadows in this palette that I don't own currently in another palette from my Natasha Denona collection. With that said though, the 2 in here look very different from the 2 that are in the existing Natasha Denona palette in my collection already. So with the Midi palette, every single one of the shadows in this palette are unique to the palette. This does have a really beautiful blush toned pink metal top and a rubber like silicone-y feel bottom. It just has this sticker on here telling you what palette it is by Natasha Denona, and I feel like all of her palettes are coming that way these days. This is a nicer palette than what you get in, you know, like her old style foamy palettes. These are actually plastic all the way around, or feel like plastic all the way around. And then I feel like these palettes, the shadows feel more stable in this kind of palette makeup than they do in this kind of palette makeup with the foam. I also like that these Midi palettes come with the shadow names on the contraption on the, you know, palette versus on a piece of plastic that you put over the top of the shadows, much like this. What I did always love about Natasha Denona's palettes is even though there was this plastic piece in here, it wasn't a loose plastic piece. I love that the Midi ones come with the shadow names on the palette, though it leaves you one less thing to try to lose. It does have a really nice mirror on it. I just still have the, you know, coating on the mirror to protect the mirror. I hardly ever use those mirrors in my palettes anyways. So let's swatch this guy. All of the shadows in these two palettes feel really nice and creamy, really beautiful to the touch, not grippy, not like sandpapery and even. And with that being said, they also blend out on your eye in the same way. They're a really easy blend, but they can be tricky if you go in super heavy to begin with. So the first shadow in here is Glitz. This is a baby pink duochrome. It has kind of a champagne-y shift to it, much like the Galaxia in the Mini, but this one is a lot more pink, whereas Galaxia leans a lot more champagne. And then we have Andy in here. Andy is a matte taupe lilac, and this is one of her creamed powder formulas. And the next one is called Jade, and it is Jude, I'm sorry, and it is a metallic taupe. It really gives a like almost a rose gold feel. Then we have Mad, which is a pinky toned white. This one is the most perfect brow bone inner corner shade that I have found in any one palette. It brightens so well because of the pinkiness in it, and it is in my eye look today in the inner corner and the brow bone. I wore it every single day in the inner corner and the brow bone. It's just a really perfect inner corner brow bone shade. And then we have Vivian, which is a matte light pink. This is another one that is a cream to powder formula. It is very light. It is the perfect transition shade, honestly. It is perfect for those that are paler than me. I really couldn't find a use for it in an eye look except for as a transition shade because it's a little bit too pinky to go into my brow bone and my inner corner. Not quite as bright to go into my inner corner or brow bone, but also was really kind of dull on my eye looks, if I'm honest. All right, the next set we have is this one here, which is called Groove. Groove is a matte medium maroon. It's got kind of a warm undertone to it, and it is so pretty. What a beautiful matte shade. This one was one of my favorites to use in the palette, actually. And it sat next to one of my least favorites to use in the palette, which was called Opart. And Opart is a matte dark taupe brown. It is one of her cream to matte formulas, and this one I felt was the worst in the palette for fallout. Now, with this shadow, I could actually feel and hear the fallout, which is very odd to me. I don't think I've ever had a shadow that I could feel and hear the fallout in an, you know, as I was putting it on my eye look. It is a beautiful shade. I have it in my eye look today. I had no problems using it in an eye look. It is the deepest like brown tone in the palette, so it's going to give you the oomph that you need for like outer V or like deepening up any eye look. It's a beautiful shade. It just has a lot of fallout, and it's heavy fallout, if that makes any sense. Then I have this shade here, which is called Psychedelic. I'm not really sure why they called this one Psychedelic. It doesn't really match the name, in my opinion. It's just a metallic baby pink. It does have a little bit of like blue fleck to it, but it doesn't really show up in your eye look. But it is still a really beautiful pink that is a really pretty, like all over the lid shadow. And then we have Go-Go. Go-Go is a really pretty metallic warm rose tone. This is a creamed powder, and this reminds me kind of like of a milky, like rosy tone. You know, when you like have strawberry milk, that kind of is what this reminds me of. The color, the tone of it, maybe just a little bit more pink than strawberry milk, or a little bit more rosy than strawberry milk, but it's a very milky, rosy, matte tone. And this is, again, creamed powder. And then we have Patty, which is a beautiful metallic rosy copper. Then on this hand, we have the first one, which is called Swing. And this one is a metallic dark cool toned maroon. So it does have a little bit more of that like blue purple to it than the maroon previous, which looked a lot more red. And then we have this one here, which is called Nude Mauve, and it is a matte medium neutral nude shade that does kind of have a mauvey feel to it. Then we have this shade here, which is called Rebellion. This is a cream to powder as well, and it is a matte burgundy, and you guys, just how beautiful is that shade? It is also one of my favorites that I used in this palette all week. Then we have Hello, which is a metallic taupe nude, so it's a perfect complement to the nude mauve shade right here. That nude has just enough coppery feel to it, but also just enough pinky feel to it that it perfectly goes with every other shadow in this palette. And then we have this one here, which is called Amara, and it is a matte like vintage rose. It again reminds me of like milkiness. It's not quite as coral as the like milky go-go one that has that rosy deep tone to it. This one I would feel is more like a milky red rose, whereas the go-go shade was more of a like milky pink rose. These are all the shadows in the 15 pan retro palette, and I just feel like it reminds me a lot of the Huda Beauty New Nudes, which was one of my favorite palettes the year that came out. I just really love the tone of these shadows. Like, I feel like this tone of shadow looks really good on my complexion and with my eye color, and I feel like I can do a lot with these shadows and make them look different every single time, even though some of them are pretty similar. So like at first glance looking at these, there does seem to be a little bit of redundancy going on. I think that this shade is a standalone, pretty unique, really beautiful, like milky toned red in my collection. This shade here and this shade here partner together so beautifully. I had a really great time with both of these palettes. I think this gave me the perfect like grunginess to these beautiful pink shades that I needed. I love that this is more of a equal value mattes to shimmers. I also really love her cream to powder formula. I fell in love with it when I brought in Metropolis, which actually has 14 cream to powder formulas in that palette. And I stand by that formulation. I think it's a beautiful formula, and if you go in too heavy, you're not gonna love it. But I feel like it's a formula that is perfection from the very get, as long as you don't try to use it like you would a Too Faced eyeshadow. I think that these palettes are beautiful. They'll perfectly stay in my collection. I do think that I will probably partner this one with the Glam palette and make two pretty perfect different palettes by just taking out and rearranging these. But words of wisdom for you that might be thinking that you might want to do the same thing with any of your Natasha Denona palettes: these shadows do not have the name or the palette on the back of the shadow. So if you are going to rearrange your Natasha Denona palettes, just be mindful of the fact that you're going to need to put palette name and the shade name on the back of the pan. And the pans aren't necessarily the largest thing on the planet. So with that said, I am going to go pick my new palette, and I will be right back. Okay, I think I might do 2 palettes next time as well, and I am going with 2 9-pan palettes. I haven't used ColourPop in a hot minute, so I brought this into my collection. I am too embarrassed to tell you how long ago, and I'm excited to actually use it. I haven't used it yet, but I did just dig in the other palette to one of the shades in this, so I am kind of excited to use this. This is the ColourPop Baroque palette, and my friend Anna has this palette, and actually her use of that palette is what convinced me to purchase this at a time where I really wasn't into cool tones. But man, just look at how beautiful this palette is. The second palette that I'm pulling in, I think will beautifully pair with this palette. And like immediately when I thought, I think I'm going to use Baroque, I was like, I am also going to use this palette because I think it's a perfect partner. This is the Huda Beauty Purple Haze palette. I did get this in an Ipsy. I think the last Ipsy that was the Ipsy X, but look at how beautiful these are. I think this is going to give me the light tones that I maybe am going to crave by using just these like deep gray blues. So yeah, I think that these are the colors that I'm going for the next week, and I cannot wait to get these on my eyes. I'm really actually very fascinated by this shadow here. It kind of reminds me of glass bowl in a way. So if you guys have this palette, you'll have to let me know how you feel about it, or you know, the Purple Haze palette. I'm excited to use both of these in the coming week, and I'm excited to come back to you guys next week and talk about it. I hope that I'll have my video up on Monday next week, but again, with the holiday, it might be Wednesday again before I get it up. I do hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that if you did, you're considering giving it a big thumbs up. It really does help our channels out here. I also hope that you liked it or me enough that you're considering subscribing if you aren't subscribed yet. I would really appreciate you guys subscribing to my channel. It's totally free, and there are 56% of you out there watching me that aren't subscribed yet. So just do it. Like, what's stopping you? I would love to know what's stopping you, but I would also appreciate it if you just hit that subscribe button. If you do that, please let me know that you're subscribed down in my comment section. I would love to welcome you in personally. With that being said, we are on the countdown to New Year's Eve and New Year's, and I just want to wish you guys an amazing New Year's Eve. I hope that you guys have something safe planned, but also super fun, and I look forward to doing the next palette roulette in the brand new year. I hope that you guys are well, and that you're safe, and that you're happy, and that your family is also well and safe and happy, and I hope that you all are loving each other, but loving each other from afar. And until next time, bye friends.